In a snowbound town gripped by suspicion, reclusive immigrant fights to keep a crumbling library alive for forgotten children. One stormy night, she risks everything to save a wounded stranger left for dead. Whispers call him a criminal, but she sees something else. A week later, outsiders roll in carrying a secret that could thaw Frostvale's coldest hearts. What makes a stranger worth saving? Can kindness rewrite a town's story? Like, share your thoughts below, and subscribe to find out. Frostvale was a cold, suspicious town, its icy streets winding past weathered houses and faded shops, their signs peeling like forgotten memories. The air bit deep, a chill that clung to your bones. Folks here didn't trust easily, their whispers sharp as the wind slicing through pines. Mira, 32, was an outsider, her brown skin stark against the snow, her dark hair tied back. She wore a patched coat and carried tattered books, their covers curled from love. She ran a small library at the town's edge, a drafty shack where she taught kids to read and mended pages. But Frostvale didn't want her stories. They called her the stranger, their voices laced with doubt. She walked to the empty town, boots crunching snow, townsfolk muttering suspiciously. 5 years of whispers about her past, her accent cut like frostbite. The library was her fight, for kids with no shoes, parents with no hope, built from scraps, funded by scrubbing floors. It was her stand. They avoided her, but Mira kept on, jaw set, eyes steady, for the kids, for stories that gave them wings in a town that clipped them. Tonight, a blizzard would bring a stranger to change everything. Frostvale's general store was cramped, shelves sagging with canned goods and dusty boxes, the air thick with stale coffee and damp wool. A rusty bell jingled as Mira entered, boots leaving wet prints on warped floorboards. She carried a basket, milk, bread, apples for the library kids. But as she stepped in, eyes locked on her, the room heavy with suspicion. Folks stared openly. 2 old men by the coffee pot froze, gazes sharp as ice. A woman in a quilted jacket clutched her purse, murmuring to the cashier, "What's she doing?" Here cashier Carl, grizzled and scowling, leaned over. Mira got enough for that, or expecting a handout. His words stung, but Mira stayed steady, setting her basket down, counting coins earned from late nights mending books. The murmurs crept up her spine. "Where's her money from?" one man muttered. "Not honest," the woman hissed. 5 years in Frostvale and they still saw a schemer, her brown skin, quiet accent, and library for forgotten kids proof enough for their distrust. She wanted to face them, to say her library was a lifeline, built from scraps, but she held back. As always, she gripped her groceries, the bell jingling as she stepped into the cold, snow crunching underfoot. The murmurs followed, sharp as frost wind. She pulled her coat close, breath clouding, and walked on. The library waited, the kids' smiles worth more than a town's approval. Yet their words still burned, a quiet ache beneath her resolve. The blizzard clawed at Frostvale, snow piling against Mira's house, windows rattling. Inside, a lamp flickered as she mended a tattered book, needle steady. The wind howled, then a faint knock, desperate, barely audible, broke through. Mira's heart raced. Who'd be out in this? She pulled her coat tight, opened the door, cold rushing in. A man slumped there, face pale, blood trickling from a forehead gash, his gray-green eyes dimmed with pain. "Help, please," he whispered, collapsing into the snow. Mira knelt, hands shaking but sure, dragging him inside. The door slammed shut. She laid him by the fireplace, embers faint, pressing a cloth to his wound. His leather jacket bore a hawk emblem, one wing torn, a stranger, like her, scarred invisibly. She wrapped him in a blanket, boiled water, hands moving with precision, honed by mending books. His breathing steadied. Mira watched firelight dance across his face. She didn't know him, but she knew abandonment, the sting of a world turning away. Years ago, she'd fled a storm of fear, surviving because someone didn't look away. Now it was her turn. The blizzard raged, but a spark flickered inside, a choice to light a new path. The morning broke cold, Frostvale draped in snow. Mira trudged through drifts, supporting the stranger, Elias, his storm-gray eyes wary. His wound oozed under a bandage. He needed a doctor. The clinic was her only option, despite the town's suspicion. The clinic's air was stale, thick with antiseptic. Nurse Ruth froze, eyeing Elias's bloodied jacket. "What's this?" she snapped. Mira steadied him, voice firm. "He's hurt, needs stitches." Ruth's gaze lingered on the hawk emblem, lips thinning. "It looks like trouble." Townsfolk in the waiting room whispered. "She's dragging in a drifter," one muttered. "Bet he's trouble," another hissed. Mira felt their stares, sharp as needles. She was used to their stories, twisting her library into schemes. With Elias, their judgments stung deeper. She helped him to a chair, ignoring them. The doctor stitched silently, glancing curiously. Elias spoke low to Mira. "You didn't have to risk their talk." She met his eyes. "I care about what's right." Her hands clenched, their words burning beneath her resolve. She left whispers trailing. "What's she hiding?" One said, "He's no good." Mira walked on, boots crunching, breath clouding. She'd saved a life, and that was enough. But a spark of defiance grew. A vow. Frostvale's cold wouldn't freeze her heart. Her choice was stirring something bigger. The snow had settled into a thin, crisp layer across Frostvale, glinting under a weak sun that barely warmed the air. Mira sat across from Elias in the dim light of the town's only a creaky building with sagging beams and a fireplace that sputtered more smoke than heat. He was stronger now, the bandage on his forehead fresh, his gray-green eyes sharper, though still guarded. Mira had brought him a thermos of soup and a few dog-eared books from her library, their covers worn soft from years of eager hands. The inn's owner, a wiry man with suspicious eyes, hovered nearby, pretending to wipe down the counter but listening all the same. Elias leaned forward, his voice low, like he was sharing a secret the walls might steal. "I owe you," he said, his fingers tracing the hawk emblem on his jacket, its torn wings stark against the faded leather. Not many would have pulled a stranger out of that storm. Mira shrugged, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, its warmth seeping into her palms. "I've been the stranger," she said simply, her eyes meeting his for a moment, before flicking away. She didn't say more, didn't need to. The weight of her own past years of running, of hiding hung unspoken between them. He spoke slowly, his words careful, like he was testing the ground. He wasn't just a drifter, he said. He'd been part of a group called Wings of Redemption, a band of ex-soldiers who'd traded their old lives for a new purpose, helping those the world forgot, orphans, runaways, towns like Frostvale left to rot. They fixed roofs, delivered food, taught kids to read, whatever was needed. "We don't look like heroes," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips, "but we show up." Mira listened, her heart stirring. The library, her library, was built on the same stubborn hope, for kids nobody else saw. She didn't tell him her story, not yet. The scars of her past fleeing a life that had burned down around her were still too raw, but his words lit something inside her, a flicker of recognition. "Why Frostvale?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Elias's smile faded, his eyes distant. "I was headed to a kid's home up north. Got caught in the storm. Guess fate had other plans." He looked at her, his gaze steady now. "You saved more than my life, Mira. You gave me a reason to stay." She stood to leave, the thermos empty, the books left on the table. The inn's owner watched her go, his whispers already forming, ready to spill into Frostvale's endless gossip. Mira didn't care. Outside, the cold bit at her cheeks, but her steps felt lighter, her breath less heavy. Elias's story, his quiet promise, had planted a seed in her chest, small, fragile, but alive. She didn't know what he'd do next, or if he'd even stay. But for the first time in years, the weight of Frostvale's stairs didn't feel so heavy. Something was coming, something bigger than the snow. A week had passed since the blizzard in Frostvale's streets lay quiet under a fresh dusting of snow, the kind that muffled sound and made the world feel smaller. Mira was in her library, stacking books on a wobbly shelf, the scent of old paper and wood polish thick in the air. The kids had gone home, their laughter still echoing in her mind, when a low rumble broke the silence, a deep, steady growl that rolled through the town like thunder. She stepped to the window, her breath fogging the glass, and saw them, a caravan of battered trucks and motorcycles, their chrome glinting under the pale midday sun. They pulled up outside, engines cutting off one by one, leaving a heavy hush. A dozen strangers climbed out, men and women in worn leather jackets, their faces weathered, their eyes sharp but not unkind. At the front stood Elias, his bandage gone, his gray-green gaze locking onto hers through the window. He wore the same hawk emblem jacket, its torn wing a quiet badge of purpose. Mira's heart kicked hard, her hand still clutching a book, its pages soft under her fingers. She stepped outside, the cold biting her cheeks, and met him on the library's cracked steps. "We heard about this place," Elias said, his voice rough but warm, gesturing to the trucks piled high with crates. "Figured you could use a hand." Mira stared, her breath catching as the others began unloading boxes of new books, laptops still in their plastic, blankets folded tight. The townsfolk had started to gather, drawn by the noise, their coats pulled close against the chill. They stood at a distance, their whispers sharp as frost. "Who are these people?" a man muttered, his voice carrying across the snow. "She's brought trouble now," a woman hissed, her scarf tied around her throat. Mira ignored them, her eyes on Elias. "What is this?" she asked, her voice unsteady, almost afraid to hope. He smiled, a small, knowing curve of his lips. "Wings of Redemption," he said simply. "We don't just pass through, we fix what's broken." The others moved with purpose, stacking supplies by the library door, their boots crunching. Snow, a woman with gray-streaked hair, winked at Mira, her hands full of picture books. A man with a scarred cheek held a crate of pencils and notebooks, nodding as he passed. They looked rough, like they'd seen too much of the world's sharp edges, but their hands were steady, their purpose clear. The whispers grew louder, the townsfolk's eyes narrowing. "They're up to no good," someone said. "Why is she letting them in?" Another scoffed. Mira felt the familiar sting of their doubt, but something new burned brighter, a spark of gratitude, of possibility. Elias stepped closer, his voice low. "You gave me a chance, Mira. Now we're giving one back." She looked at the crates, the library, the faces of these strangers, who saw what Frostvale refused to. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. The snow fell softly around them, but the cold couldn't touch her now. The snow hadn't stopped falling in Frostvale, but it felt different now, softer, like it was settling into the cracks of a town that had long forgotten how to bend. Mira stood outside her library. The old shack's walls still creaking under the weight of winter, but its windows glowed with a warmth that hadn't been there before. Inside, the kids flipped through new books, their voices bright, while the Wings of Redemption crew worked hammering nails into loose shelves, patching the leaky roof, sorting stacks of donated supplies. Elias moved among them, his hawk emblem jacket slung over a chair, his gray-green eyes catching hers with a quiet nod. The air smelled of sawdust and hope, a strange mix that made Mira's chest ache. Outside, the townsfolk lingered, their boots planted in the snow, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. They'd come slowly at first, drawn by the rumble of engines and the sight of strangers who didn't fit Frostvale's narrow mold. Old men from the diner stood at the edge of the lot, their coffee cups forgotten, squinting as if trying to unravel a puzzle. A woman from the general store, her scarf knotted tight, watched with folded arms, her lips pursed but silent. "What are they doing?" one man muttered, his voice low, like he didn't trust the answer. "Doesn't look like trouble," another said, almost surprised, his breath clouding in the cold. Mira felt their eyes, the same ones that had followed her for years, heavy with doubt, quick to judge, but now something shifted. They saw the crew, a woman with a weathered face reading to a group of kids, her voice soft as she turned the pages. A man with tattooed hands fixing a broken chair, his laughter easy as a boy in a torn coat helped him. They saw Elias holding a box of blankets, pausing to ruffle a kid's hair, and they saw Mira, not the stranger they'd whispered about, but a woman who'd built something worth saving. The whispers didn't stop, but they softened, fraying at the edges like old fabric. A teenage girl, her bike propped against a tree, edged closer, her phone lowered. "No longer filming. They're just helping," she said, half to herself, her voice carrying to the others. An old woman, who'd once called Mira a schemer, shifted her weight, her eyes narrowing less with suspicion and more with wonder. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a crack in the ice, a question where there had once been only answers. Mira caught their glances, her hands tightening around a stack of books. She didn't smile, didn't wave, but her shoulders felt lighter, like the weight of 5 years was starting to lift. Elias stepped beside her, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. "They're watching," he said, his voice low, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Let em," Mira replied, her gaze steady on the crowd. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was standing alone against Frostvale's chill. The library hummed behind her, alive with new voices, new hands, new chances. The snow kept falling, but it couldn't bury the spark that was growing, not just in her, but in the town that was starting to see Frostvale's winter clung tight, the snow piling high. But the library was no longer just a shack at the edge of town. Its walls, patched and freshly painted, stood firm against the wind, and the glow from its windows spilled out like a beacon in the dusk. Inside, the air was warm, thick with the scent of new books and hot cocoa. Kids sprawled across the floor, their faces lit with wonder as they turned crisp pages, their laughter mingling with the clatter of tools. The Wings of Redemption crew moved with quiet purpose, stacking shelves, wiring old laptops, hanging blankets to block the drafts. Mira stood among them, her hands dusted with paint, her dark eyes catching the light as she handed a picture book to a small girl with braided hair. Elias worked nearby, his hawk emblem jacket draped over a chair, his sleeves rolled up as he fixed a wobbly table. A woman from the crew, Lena, her gray-streaked hair tied back, read aloud to a circle of kids, her voice weaving stories that made their eyes wide. Another, a burly man named Tom, showed a boy how to use a screwdriver, their laughter echoing off the walls. The library wasn't just a place anymore, it was alive, humming with a pulse Frostvale hadn't felt in years. Mira watched it all, her chest tight with something she hadn't dared name, hope. Outside, the townsfolk didn't just watch anymore. They came closer, hesitant at first, like deer stepping into an open field. An old man from the diner, his coat patched at the elbows, carried a tray of homemade cookies, setting it on a table. With a gruff nod, a young mother, who'd once crossed the street to avoid Mira, lingered by the door, her toddler clutching a stuffed bear from the donation pile. "Didn't know this place was for the kids," she murmured, her voice soft, almost ashamed. Mira met her eyes, offering a small smile, and handed her a book for her child. The woman took it, her fingers trembling slightly, as if touching something she'd misjudged. The whispers hadn't stopped, but they'd changed. "They're fixing it up real nice," a man said, his voice carrying across the snowy lot. "Maybe she's not what we thought," another admitted, his scarf loose around his neck. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a shift, a crack in the frost that had kept Frostvale cold for so long. Mira felt it, the way the air seemed lighter, the way the stairs didn't sting as much. She caught Elias's glance, his gray-green eyes warm with a quiet pride. "Told you," he said, his voice low, almost lost in the hum of the room. Yup, building something real. Mira looked around, kids reading, volunteers working, townsfolk stepping closer. For years, she'd fought alone, her library a stubborn dream in a town that refused to see her. Now, it was more than hers, it was theirs. The snow fell softly outside, but inside, the library burned bright, a fire kindled by hands that didn't belong here but chose to stay. Mira's heart beat steady, her hands steady, too, as she realized the weight of her fight was no longer hers alone to carry. The library was quiet now, the kids gone home, their laughter lingering like echoes in the warm air. Frostvale's night pressed against the windows, snowflakes catching the glow of a single lamp. Mira sat on a stool, her hands cradling a worn book, its pages soft from years of care. Elias leaned against a shelf, his hawk emblem jacket slung over his shoulder, gray-green eyes steady as they watched her. The silence between them wasn't heavy, but full, like the pause before a story unfolds. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, the world felt still, safe, for the first time in years. Mira's voice broke the quiet, low and careful, like she was stepping onto thin ice. "I was a journalist once," she said, her eyes on the book, "not him. Back home, I chased truth, corruption, crime, things people wanted buried. Got too close to the wrong people." Her fingers tightened on the pages. Had to run, left everything, family, friends, my name. Frostvale was supposed to be a hiding place. She looked up, her dark eyes raw, unguarded, but it became a cage. Elias didn't speak, didn't flinch. He just listened, his presence steady, like the fire crackling in the corner. Mira's words came faster now, spilling out. "This library, these kids there, my fight now, but every day, I feel them watching, waiting for me to prove I'm what they say. A liar, a stranger." She paused, her breath uneven. "I'm tired, Elias, tired of being invisible." He stepped closer, his boots soft on the floorboards. "You're not invisible," he said, his voice rough but sure. "Not to me, not to us." He gestured toward the library, the new shelves, the books stacked high. "You built this, you saved me, you're not hiding anymore." His hand rested on hers, warm, steady, like an anchor in a storm she'd been fighting alone. Mira's throat tightened, her eyes stinging. For years, she'd carried her past like a weight, her silence a shield. But now, with Elias's hand on hers, the library alive around them, she felt something shift, a crack in the walls she'd built. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his gaze unwavering. "We're here, I'm here." The words settled deep, like seeds in thawed earth. Mira nodded, her voice gone, but her heart lighter than it had been in years. Outside, the snow fell, but inside, the library held a warmth that Frostvale's cold couldn't touch, a warmth that felt, for the first time, like home. The snow fell lightly over Frostvale, dusting the streets with a quiet grace that softened the town's hard edges. The library stood at the edge of town, its fresh paint glowing under strings of mismatched lights strung across the porch. Inside, the air was warm, alive with the clatter of cups and the hum of voices. Folding tables lined the room, covered with pies, steaming cider, and hand-painted signs from the kids. Townsfolk filled the space, shopkeepers, farmers, even the old men from the diner standing shoulder to shoulder with the Wings of Redemption crew, their hawk emblem jackets mingling with patched coats. Mira stood at the center, her hands clutching a small wooden plaque, her heart pounding louder than the crowd. The mayor, a stooped man with a voice too big for his frame, stepped to a makeshift podium, his eyes softer than Mira had ever seen. "Tonight," he said, his words carrying over the chatter, "we honor someone who showed us what Frostvale could be." Mira Hassan didn't just build a library, she built a home for our kids, for our hearts. The crowd stirred, their applause, hesitant at first, then swelling, a wave of sound that filled the room. Mira's throat tightened, her eyes tracing the faces, people who'd once crossed the street to avoid her, now clapping, their gazes warm, not cold. She stepped forward, the plaque heavy in her hands, etched with simple words, "Mira Hassan, Light of Frostvale." Her voice was steady, though her chest trembled. "This isn't mine," she said, holding it up. "It's ours. It's for the kids who read here, the hands that fixed these walls, the hearts that chose to see past fear." She glanced at Elias, his gray-green eyes shining with quiet pride. Then at the kids giggling by the tables, at Lena reading to a small boy, at the townsfolk who'd finally stepped inside. "Hope isn't a place," she said softly. "It's what happens when we show up for each other." The applause roared now, raw and real, a sound Frostvale hadn't heard in years. Elias stood at the back, arms crossed, his smile small but fierce. The kids rushed to Mira, their arms wrapping around her, their laughter brighter than the lights above. For the first time, Mira didn't feel the weight of whispers or the sting of being a stranger. Frostvale wasn't perfect, but tonight, under the library's glow, it felt like home. The snow fell outside, but inside, the warmth of new beginnings burned bright, a fire no winter could extinguish.